All right. For this, I guess this is kind of a future's present or some future, right? So we're talking about what will happen if it happens, where we get to a point where AI is drastically affecting the workforce. We're seeing some elements of it. My skepticism on some of that is I think some of these technology companies just overhired and they're claiming AI is replacing people right now. But we do know that it will eventually happen. So Andrew Yang, actually, if you followed Andrew Yang, and he was a former presidential candidate, a tech guy, right? He started startups and now he's got a group trying to do new types of politics. But what Andrew Yang recently said too is like, this is going to happen and we need to have plans in place. He's been a very big advocate for UBI, right? Which is
Mm.
universal basic income. We've talked about it a lot on our podcast. Doesn't mean that we're 100% for it. And we've actually expressed a lot of skepticism towards it as well. But I think one of the things that is happening now is people are realizing that AI is going to have this drastic effect on jobs. And they're trying to figure out, well, what do we do, right? What do we do about this, right? Because, and we talked about this, and I talk about this in one of my classes, is, I tell my students, I say, UBI, think about it this way. What is the largest employer in the United States? And they're like, well, what industry is the largest employer in the United States? And they don't know. I say the transportation sector.
Hmm.
So transportation and retail are two of the largest industries in our country, right? So if we are able to replace people who are taking orders at restaurants or flipping burgers or selling you clothes at a small retail store or large retail store, and then also we're able to replace truck drivers and Uber drivers, right, and people who are ferrying people around and transporting things. That represents hundreds of thousands to millions of jobs in the United States, and those are some of the first things that they think are going to be automated by AI, right? As well as some entry level white collar jobs, right? So you're talking about customer service representatives, and you're seeing that already. There's a ton of software out there that is replacing at least the first level of customer service when it comes to that. And you're seeing and that's where companies like Salesforce have said they've replaced a lot of those people with AI. So now we get to the point, well, what happens if there aren't enough jobs for the people who need them? And so we've talked about UBI before, but there are other alternatives out there. There are other suggested alternatives that are interesting and unique. Some of those include things like there's a government secured job. So they say, look, if there are no jobs out there, then the government will guarantee you a job. There's also some suggestions for having where it's basically called universal basic needs met. So they're saying that your food will be covered and transportation will be covered and things like that allow you to survive. And then instead of UBI where they're just giving you cash payments. So Chris, my question for you, right? Because
Hmm.
I know you've studied UBI a lot as well. We've talked about it a lot. A lot of the futurists we follow, like Ray Kurzweil and others that we've talked about, mention UBI. What are your thoughts on this? And do you think that this is the right way to go?
I agree with you don't just have to have one way. You know what I mean? Like there's been a lot of experiments, and I'm sure we can bring these up when it comes to the implementation of UBI. When it comes to just actually giving people money, it's very helpful. But there is this whole idea of like, okay, who gets what, and is it like a percentage based on how much they were spending, based on what they're doing? Does everybody get the same amount? It doesn't matter how much money you have; everybody gets the same amount. So we all sort of rise in the boat together at the same pace. Is it distributed in sort of a progressive way? And I think when you concentrate so much on the UBI, you're missing out on the other things that we could actually provide. I really think when you were talking about things like what can we do to help people, I think cities actually do a pretty good job of this when it comes to the transportation that we're talking about.
Mhm.
So having high speed subway or rail systems, Chicago, actually, whenever you visit Chicago, I'm just enamored with the that they have there. It's beautiful. It's so easy to get around. It's fairly cheap. Like whenever I go visit Chicago, working for Sprout Social, yeah, $15 and I get to ride over the entire city for 3 days. It's totally fantastic. And all different parts and be able to visit everything at a fairly cheap rate, very fuel efficient. And that's a super important part of living, right? Just getting around. So cities have a unique way of kind of keeping us centered and keeping us together and maybe doing it sort of on the cheap, which actually helps when this this whole idea of universal basic income. I think the other idea that you're talking about, it's a little bit of back to the future. We do talk about this, right? The way to deliver the future is sometimes to look at the past. What happened? What happened during the Great Depression when we had this huge economic peril that was not only in the United States, but frankly around the world? Lots of government spending on not only infrastructure, but government programs to bet, the creation of road systems, the Tennessee Valley Authority. Obviously, World War II was a part of it too, right? But doing things like investing in your country and in infrastructure and giving folks jobs to do that is beneficial to your people, which is beneficial to the tax base, which is beneficial to the society. I think a part of UBI and a part of these struggles when it comes to AI and automation, essentially extinguishing somewhat of the human labor. And actually, we could talk about that because actually there's a lot of chances where it's just going to not necessarily extinguish, but it's just going to change what skill sets are required. So maybe the labor won't go down, but the training and the ability and the retraining is the thing that actually we have to fix too. But the reality around UBI is it doesn't have to just be UBI. I mean, it could be
Exactly.
a multitude of factors of figuring out economies of scale to help pay for healthcare, figuring out pension systems to have it be not only more equitable, but an easier way to save money. And algorithmic finance is coming. And so this actually might be a real possibility. I think when it comes to dealing with AI and automation, we have to get creative and really think. And I think too, this should be a private public partnership.
Hmm.
Government cannot create jobs for everybody, and nor can the private sector. And I think there's a real chance for private sector to help. Maybe perhaps they did this company towns, company training centers, retrain, and government actually helping not only invest in certain technologies, but actually passing that technology onto the private sector so they can go and create jobs because they have efficiency and a capitalistic push in order to do things. There's a positivity that I see sometimes in the world. I think there's a lot of negativity in the world, and I think when we think UBI, it's like, well, all the jobs are going away. We have to do it. But frankly, we could just be more innovative. We can
Hmm.
think deeper about this stuff. We can come up with as many different ideas as possible, pilot them, make sure that we think aggressively on this. But I think, frankly, we don't. And I think there's more of a butting heads when it comes to the private industry versus government. And you have, frankly, I think it causes the divide in our politics as well, where it's government doesn't do any good and private industry doesn't do any good. So nobody's doing any good. So we can't co-partner to create like these solutions. I think there has to be a partnership between private industry and government, directions and investments in its people. And that's how we're going to be able to get past these potential issues with AI and automation. So I think it's
So
a really important topic to bring up.
yeah, so I'll give you some good statistics. Right? So this is some
Great.
statistics because UBI has been around for a while, right? And a lot of countries and groups have tried it, right? So this is a statistic that came from Britannica, right? So it's a nonprofit, and they've said basically that a UBI set at $1,000 per adult per month and $300 per child per month would entirely eradicate poverty in the United States. So if you were to do that, we would completely eradicate poverty. There are and there's also pros and cons with this, right, as well, right? So these are the pros that people focus on, and there are cons, right? Pros is that UBI reduces poverty. That has been proven, and income inequality, and it improves physical and mental health. People are healthier mentally and physically when they have UBI. It leads to positive job growth and a better educated citizenry. So people actually, when they have UBI, have gone out and tried to become more educated
Hmm.
and look for jobs and better jobs. It's also been proven to reduce gender inequality because unfortunately, some of the poorest people in the world, right, are single mothers, right? Women tend to be much more heavily affected by poverty than men. That's just the case around the world. Some of the cons that people are saying, oh, it's expensive. How are we going to pay for it? It increases poverty by giving everyone instead of targeting the poor. It removes the incentive to work. That's one of the biggest arguments that people have about UBI. But there's been a lot of successful use cases for UBI, right, around the world. So here's a really interesting use case. In Brazil, they implemented UBI for a small portion of the population. And they found that the poverty rate was the lowest it had ever been in 40 years in just
Amazing.
6 months of implementing a UBI program in 2020. So they
Wonderful.
just gave everyone $110 a month. So they call it like 600 like reais, like that. That's what and then that's their currency. And so it's distributed to about 25% of the population. That's not a small amount. And they gave it to people as a pandemic relief program. And that was the the result, right? Is it lowered poverty rates. Namibia, right? So Namibia, what they did is they did a basic income grant, right, where it reduced household poverty rates from 76% of residents before the trial started to 37% of residents after 1 year. Child malnutrition rates also fell from 42% to 17% in just 6 months. India did a UBI trial, and they said that they found that it improved public health, because it allowed people to afford medicine. It improved sanitation. People were able to gain access to clean water. They were able to eat more regularly, and it reduced their anxiety levels, right? So that's that mental health thing. Mincome, which was a UBI trial in Manitoba, Canada, found that hospitalizations for accidents, injuries, and mental health diagnoses significantly decreased
Mm.
during their trial. So there's a lot of positive things that come out of this. And the reason that we're talking about this, and I think you and I tend to be a little bit more conservative, but I do think there are things that the government should take care of for people. They should, and the reason being, and part of my conservative beliefs are that it's cheaper for all of us. It's been proven that in the United States we have one of the most expensive healthcare systems in the world. We spend the most on healthcare, and where we could spend a lot less if we were to invest in preventative healthcare. And that's everybody. Like if someone has to goes to the hospital, then the taxpayers end up footing that bill if they don't have insurance. And they're not just going to turn that person away. So it's going to be funded by us as a society. So it makes sense to have some things in place to make sure that people are able to find a job. And I believe that, but you're seeing the issues that are happening even with food stamps in the United States. People are saying, well, you need to be applying for jobs and going for this stuff to be able to get food stamps. And I do agree that you shouldn't just get something and not have to try to get better yourself. But I think UBI is a good explanation of one way that we could do that. We could say, well, everyone is guaranteed at some point, if you get unemployed, you get some sort of social safety net. Most countries in the world provide some sort of something like that, and to a good amount of success, as was shown in what I just mentioned. So there's a lot of possibilities there. So I'll pass it off to you, Chris. Knowing what you know about that, I mean, what are your thoughts about what it should be? Should it be something like social, food assistance and things like that? Well, I mean, do you think that it should be a monochrome?
I mean, everything that we say, I mean, how about it all, right? We could have these UBI programs, but you could also have things like city vertical farming, which allows people to eat for free or pennies on the dollar, just depending on, how you sort of integrate this within the city or town or little rural area that you live in. We have the technology to do this. That's what's really crazy about really being a futurist, right? Like it's a common thing. We say it all the time. The future's already here. It's just unevenly distributed. And we just distribute
Mhm.
these future technologies and the future's ideas. We could actually have a society where maybe not having a job is okay because you have 3D printed shelters that didn't cost that much and you have your food that is taken care of, and perhaps maybe because your food is nutrient rich, and your transportation is automated, chances of injury as well as poor health is less. So you can actually maybe not do so much or maybe not work as hard. And I think that's the other thing to kind of think on, which is okay, jobs, work has been a part of kind of human life for like hundreds of years, and especially in the 20th and 21st century, it's what we do, right? You sit down, you talk to somebody, and one of the first things you ask is, "Hey, what do you do? Hey, what do you do?" And you tell folks what you do for a living. What happens when you don't do something or you do less of it because perhaps there's not only automated world, but perhaps maybe yeah, you're not only out of work, but maybe you're underworked because society doesn't need you to do that. What happens
Right.
to your purpose? What happens to your dignity? Do we do other things where we become more creative, or we get to join bands, or we get to explore science or do other things that could actually give you something that you wouldn't even think about, but you could maybe go to school and get re-educated and go do something that you weren't even thinking you had the ability to do, which could be a fantastic future. So I do think there's a part of this too, where decoupling the idea of having a job and having that be a part of the economic engine and the need for more stuff and everything does not only UBI, but also the automation and AI of jobs actually not only lead to reduction of jobs, but also lead to a flourishing of potential for the human, for creative
Mhm.
endeavors, for endeavors that involve connection and common touch, and maybe just spending more time with your loved ones. I think we've been taught. I think a lot of companies now they're doing the 4-day work week. I've been hearing things about the 3-day work week potentially,
Yes.
and honestly, that's just showing that AI and automation is right around the corner if we can do the same amount of work in 3 days for sure.
Mhm.
So I think there's a lot of deeper concepts beyond just the money in your bank account when it comes here. What does it mean when our job is not who we are? And then who are we are, when we don't actually possibly need to be working 40, 50 hours a week? What do we become then?
Well, I think we can talk about funding here as well, right? So, like funding, so you're seeing a lot of nations, right, building these sovereign wealth funds, right, to be able to, and it's basically investing in the future of their people.
Hmm,
And I know Donald Trump has mentioned that he wants to build that in the United States. I mean, there are a lot of countries that do it really well, like Norway and Australia, for a good example. They're really good. Doing good things with investing their population's money and or taking the mineral wealth, like what Norway does, taxing it, right? And, instead of redistributing that to people immediately, putting it in a sovereign wealth fund for the future of their people, right? We've
cool.
got one of the world's biggest sovereign wealth funds because, and they're a nation of several million people, right? Not nearly as, I think there's the most population as like some of the states in the United States and some less. So the fact that they have that is because they are carefully investing people's money. And because in the end, they might be able to draw from that for when there's a future when there might be at least a lot less jobs. And so are people who are needing retraining and needing time to retrain, right? So to me, that is a great way to potentially fund these types of programs, taking the mineral wealth of your nation, right? And being able to really apply it for the people who live on the land. That makes a ton of sense. I don't just believe also like we mentioned just giving people money. I think that but there should be some inalienable rights. People should be able to survive in your country because poverty leads to crime, which affects other people. Like there's no reason that people should be against these types of policies if they're done in a measured in a good way. Right. I don't care if you're one side of the aisle or the other. There just has to be ways to do this and do it well so that it protects the future of a population.